When we think of the words first-person shooter, there's quite a few common things that come to mind. If you grew up in the 90s, you might think back to titles like Doom or Quake. On the other hand, gamers nowadays will probably think of big titles like Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, or even Battlefield. A few years ago, at least, but whatever title you think of first, there's no doubt that it's one of the most popular game genres out there, with millions of players worldwide generating billions in revenue annually. But what if I told you that there's a game that most of you have never heard of before that happens to be much bigger than all of those titles? A game with a very popular TV series adaptation, over 1 billion user accounts, and total franchise revenue of almost $7 billion. Today we'll be taking a look at the most popular FPS game in the world that you've never even heard of, and how it managed to overshadow every other game in its class still to this day over 15 years after its initial release. Crossfire. In the mid-2000s, online FPS titles were really taking off in the gaming industry, and along with the beginning of the 7th generation of game consoles, this caused a shift in focus from PC gaming over to these consoles instead, especially for players in North America and Western Europe. However, in many Asian countries particularly, PC was still the preferred platform. To put it simply, it was cheaper, it had more titles, and it was more accessible. Some of the most popular competitive games at the time in Asia were Dota and StarCraft, two PC-exclusive MOBA games that are still popular today. But oddly enough, there was one genre that was lacking in a competitive sense. It was first-person shooters. As I spoke about in my last video, Counter-Strike was no longer popular in Asia for many different reasons in the mid-2000s, so I'll link the video here if you're interested to get some more background information on the topic. Either way though, just because it wasn't played competitively in Asia at the time, doesn't mean that FPS games still didn't exist there. Combat Arms, AVA, Soldier Front, just to name a few, were quite popular and accessible free-to-play titles in Asia, all of which shared the same typical FPS gameplay, each with their own quirks that made them unique. But there was still another missing piece to the puzzle here. There wasn't much of a competitive aspect to these games. This is where Crossfire comes in. Crossfire was developed by Smilegate Entertainment and saw its original Korean release in 2007, with releases to other countries and regions such as China in 2008, North America in 2009, and Russia in 2010. Smilegate is a South Korean-based game company, and other than Crossfire, they're mainly known for their very popular MMORPG Lost Ark from 2019. Okay, hold on a minute. You might be thinking, if this FPS game is the most popular with the most players generating the most revenue in the entire world, then why haven't I heard of it yet? Well, the answer mostly lies in two main points here. The first being regional releases. Being developed in South Korea, Crossfire was first released to local markets in 2007, while releases in countries like Japan and Vietnam followed the next year in 2008. By this point, Crossfire had picked up a bit of a following, players enjoyed the simple gameplay loop, level of competition, and of course the high amount of items and customization. But nobody could have expected what happened in April of 2008, with its official release in China. China's population sat at 1.3 billion people at the time, coupled with their usually strict censorship laws regarding video games and other media. Well, it's only natural what happened next for Crossfire. The game exploded. Tens of millions of players across China were creating accounts and logging into play, and even more later across the rest of Asia, as the game expanded with more releases in other countries. The continent of Asia makes up over half of the world's population, so naturally, as Crossfire expanded, its player base grew significantly. In fact, it's said that Crossfire has a lifetime total of 1 billion unique user accounts across 80 different countries worldwide. Even further than this, it is reported that Crossfire is one of the highest grossing video game franchises of all time, with nearly $7 billion in total revenue generated just from 2007 to 2017. While the game saw immense popularity across Asia, unsurprisingly, it was a different story for the rest of the world. Crossfire saw its North American or Western release in 2009, which was managed by the company Z8 Games. Smilegate attempted a sort of marketing campaign in Western countries to gain traction and generate hype for the release, holding public beta tests and the like. While it did see some popularity at first in the EU especially, Crossfire really didn't take off in North America. Most gamers at the time that saw or played Crossfire were already fans of other competitive FPS titles, the most comparable at the time being Counter-Strike. And with Crossfire already being criticized by gamers for its overwhelming similarities to CS, well, there wasn't much of a reason to switch over. as well as the backlash it received for its extreme focus on microtransactions, and yes, I can confirm the store items in Crossfire are quite plentiful. Now, bundles and skins aren't at all uncommon today, but pay-to-win mechanics are largely frowned upon in gaming for obvious reasons. In essence, you could buy better performing weapons and items for real money, and probably the strangest part is that a lot of these purchases are more like a rental than anything, where you have to renew your purchase after a set amount of time, which apparently also isn't a very uncommon practice across many other games that are tailored to Asia specifically. On top of all this, Crossfire was of course criticized even more for its extreme resemblance to Counter-Strike, even having the same gameplay mechanics, many similar game modes, and maps that are quite literally copied recreations. So naturally, the Western player base that was used to Counter-Strike saw little reason to switch over to a less popular game in the region that shared so many similarities, especially one that focused so heavily on pay-to-win mechanics. That being said, there were still many smaller communities of Crossfire fans in the West that would organize scrimmages and mini tournaments amongst each other for fun. Smilegate did make another attempt at the North American market more recently with the Xbox exclusive Crossfire X, which, well, I can only describe as a total dumpster fire, and probably made the Crossfire name even less popular amongst North American players. As for accessibility, you could say Crossfire had a lot going for it. For starters, it was free, it could run on anything, it was simple and addictive, it had a very popular mobile spin-off, a TV series released in 2020 that saw 1.7 billion views across China within its first 4 weeks, and it's also said to have a full-length film adaptation by Sony Pictures coming soon. Further than all that, with the high popularity of internet cafes, Crossfire was a great option to offer for two primary reasons. One, well, it didn't take much to run. The simple graphics meant the game could basically work on anything, which made it especially popular in certain countries and regions where high-end gaming PCs aren't as common. And two, it was free, meaning there was virtually no investment needed for the cafe owners and sometimes lower prices for players. All of this made the game extremely accessible in many forms of media, with really no barrier of entry, so pretty much anybody could play and enjoy Crossfire from anywhere in the world. Although Crossfire failed to take off in Europe and North America, it still holds a very large player base today in Asia, especially China, but also in South American countries like Brazil. With this large player base comes many popular streamers, professional players, and of course, the tournaments. The biggest of which being CFS, short for Crossfire Stars, an international esports tournament that started in 2013 exclusively made for the game. The winning team at CFS in 2022 were awarded $500,000, so you could say it isn't exactly a small championship. The original Crossfire was released over 15 years ago now, and it is still the most played FPS game in the world, that most people outside of Asia will probably never really play, pretty much solely due to its immense following that it has built up in the most populated continent in the world. Now, I usually make it clear that my videos are mostly meant to be void of my own opinion. I'm simply here to provide some cool stories and information, but for Crossfire, I figured I might as well end with this. While it looks pretty cool and plays alright at the end of the day, I think I can speak for most people watching this video when I say I'd rather just stick to what I know best. Good old-fashioned Counter-Strike.